Welcome to Part 4 of the Cartwright Murder. Visit brooksaudiobooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks. And be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 16. I stood there, staring at the empty bed. The covers had been tossed aside, and Louise's pink silk dressing gown was missing from where it had rested at the foot of the bed. The night lamp flickered dimly, only emphasizing the void in the room. I reached for the gown, but my hands trembled so much that I set it back down and stumbled toward the door. Voices echoed in the hallway, and Claire rushed toward me. "What's happening?" she exclaimed. "What was that noise? Where's Louise?" "She's not in her room," I replied, feeling numb. "I think she was the one who screamed." Emily appeared now, carrying a candle. We huddled together at the top of the winding staircase, gazing down into the dark shadows below. Nothing stirred, and silence enveloped us. Just then, we heard Michael racing up the main staircase. He hurried down the hall to join us. "There's no one trying to get in. I thought I heard a scream. Who was it?" Our shocked expressions told him everything he needed to know. "Someone screamed down there," I said, "and Louise isn't in her room." Without a moment's hesitation, Michael snatched the candle from Emily and dashed down the spiral staircase. I followed him at a slower pace, my nerves paralyzed. It felt like I could barely move. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, Michael gasped and set the candle down. "Aunt Ray," he called sharply. At the foot of the staircase, curled up in a crumpled heap, was Louise Cartwright. She lay pale and limp, her dressing gown hanging loosely from one sleeve of her nightdress, and her long dark braid trailing down the steps above her, as if she had fallen. She was still alive. Michael gently laid her on the floor and began rubbing her cold hands while Claire and Emily hurried to fetch some stimulants. As for me, I remained at the foot of that eerie staircase, unable to move because my knees felt too weak, and I wondered how all of this would end. Louise was still unconscious, but her breathing was improving, so I suggested we move her back to bed before she woke up. It was a chilling sight, seeing her there in nearly the same position and in the same spot where we had found her brother's body. To make it worse, the hall clock faintly chimed 3 o'clock in the distance. It wasn't until 4 that Louise was able to speak, and the first light of dawn was filtering through her east-facing windows by the time she recounted what had happened. I'll share her story as she told it. She lay propped up in bed, and Michael sat beside her, undeterred, holding her hand while she spoke. "I couldn't sleep well," she started, partly because I had napped in the afternoon. Emily brought me some hot milk at 10, and I dozed off until midnight. Then I woke up and started thinking about things, worrying, and I just couldn't get back to sleep. I was wondering why I hadn't heard from Arnold since that night at the lodge. I was afraid he might be sick because he was supposed to do something for me, and he hadn't come back. It must have been around 3 when I heard someone knocking. I sat up and listened closely to be sure, and the knocking continued. It was soft, and I was about to call for Emily. Then it hit me what it might be. The east entrance and the circular staircase were always used by Arnold when he came home late. Sometimes when he forgot his key, he'd knock, and I'd go down to let him in. I thought he had come back to see me. I didn't consider the time. He always kept erratic hours. But I worried I was too weak to go down the stairs. The knocking persisted, and just as I was about to call for Emily, she dashed through the room and out into the hall. I got up then, feeling weak and dizzy, and put on my dressing gown. If it was Arnold, I knew I had to see him. The darkness enveloped everything, but I was familiar with the layout. I reached for the stair rail and hurried down as fast as I could. The knocking had stopped, and I worried I was too late. I reached the bottom of the staircase and made my way to the door leading to the east veranda. Until that moment, I had assumed it was Arnold. The door was unlocked and opened just a crack. Outside, everything was pitch black. I felt strange and unsteady. Then I thought maybe Arnold had used his key. He often did peculiar things, so I turned back. Just as I reached the bottom of the staircase, I thought I heard someone coming. My nerves were frayed as I stood there in the dark, and I could hardly keep my footing. I managed to climb up to the 3rd or 4th step when I felt a presence approaching me on the stairs. The next moment, a hand brushed against mine on the rail. Someone swept past me, and I screamed. Then I must have fainted. That was Louise's account. There could be no doubt about its authenticity, and what made it even more heartbreaking to me was that the poor girl had come down to respond to the call of a brother who would never require her gentle care again. Twice now, without any clear reason, someone had entered the house through the east entrance, moved through the corridors without hindrance, and exited as quietly as they had arrived. Had this unknown visitor come a third time the night Arnold Cartwright was murdered? Or a fourth time, when Mr. Hartley had larked someone in the clothes chute? I think none of us could sleep. Eventually, we scattered to bathe and dress, leaving Louise relatively unscathed by her ordeal. I resolved that before the day ended, she needed to know the real situation. So after breakfast, I took action. I readied an unused bedroom in the east wing, down the narrow corridor, for someone to stay in. From then on, Alex, the gardener, would sleep there. It was absurd to have just one man in that vast house, especially with everything that was happening, and I must say, Alex was as agreeable a companion as one could hope for. The following morning, Michael and I thoroughly examined the circular staircase, the small entry at its base, and the card room that opened from it. There was no sign of anything out of the ordinary from the night before. If we hadn't heard those strange, rapping sounds ourselves, I might have thought Louise's imagination was getting the better of her. The outer door was closed and locked, and the staircase curved above us just like any other staircase would. Michael, who had dismissed my story about the night Emily and I had stayed alone with a laugh, was now serious. He scrutinized the paneling of the wainscoting above and below the stairs, clearly searching for a hidden door. Suddenly, a scrap of paper Mr. Hartley had found among Arnold Cartwright's belongings flashed in my mind. I repeated the contents to him as accurately as I could, while Michael jotted them down in his notebook. "I wish you told me that earlier," he said as he carefully tucked the memo away. We found nothing unusual inside the house, and I wasn't expecting much from a check of the porch and grounds either. But as we opened the outer door, something clattered to the floor of the entryway. It was a billiard cue. Michael picked it up with a startled exclamation. "That's quite careless," he said. "Some of the servants must have been playing around." I wasn't convinced. None of the servants would venture into that wing at night unless they absolutely had to. And a billiard cue, of all things. As a weapon for offense or defense, it was ridiculous, unless one entertained Emily's idea of a ghost. Even then, as Michael pointed out, a billiard-playing ghost would be a rather modern twist on an ancient concept. That afternoon, Claire, Michael, and I made our way to the coroner's inquest in town. Dr. Stewart had also been summoned, as it turned out that on that early Sunday morning, after Claire and I had retired to our rooms, he had been called to examine the body. The four of us travelled in the carriage, choosing the dreadful roads over the noisy train, with half of Casanova watching us curiously as we passed. Along the way, we decided to remain silent about Louise and her meeting with her stepbrother the night he died. She was already in enough trouble. Chapter 17. As I summarize what transpired at the inquest, I feel compelled to remind the reader of the events surrounding Arnold Cartwright's murder. Many details were left unaddressed during the inquest, and some information that was shared was new to me. Overall, it was a somber gathering, and the 6 men serving as the coroner's jury seemed like mere puppets in the hands of the formidable coroner. Claire and I sat toward the back, our veils down to shield us from prying eyes. Among the attendees, I recognized several familiar faces. Barbara Fitzhugh, who always wore the most extravagant morning attire at the slightest occasion because it suited her, and Mr. Jarvis, who had come over from the Greenwood Club the night of the murder. Mr. Harton was also present, appearing restless as the inquest dragged on, yet attentive to every detail of the evidence. From a corner, Mr. Hartley observed the proceedings with keen interest. Dr. Stewart was the first to testify. His account was brief and straightforward. On the Sunday morning before, just 5:15, he received a phone call from Mr. Jarvis, urgently requesting him to come to Sunnyside due to an accident involving Mr. Arnold Cartwright, who had been shot. He dressed quickly, packed some medical instruments, and drove to Sunnyside. Upon arrival, Mr. Jarvis escorted him to the east wing. There, as he had fallen, lay the body of Arnold Cartwright. The doctor noted that his instruments were unnecessary. The man was already dead. When the coroner inquired, he confirmed that the body had not been moved, apart from being turned over. It rested at the base of the circular staircase. The doctor believed that death had been instantaneous, noting that the body still held some warmth and rigor mortis had not yet set in, which typically occurs late in cases of sudden death. He also asserted that the possibility of suicide could likely be ruled out. While the wounds could have been self-inflicted, it would have been difficult to do so, and no weapon had been found. The doctor finished his examination, but hesitated, clearing his throat. "Mr. Coroner," he began, "I hope you don't mind me taking a moment of your time to mention something that might shed light on this situation." The audience perked up immediately. "Please go ahead, Doctor," the coroner encouraged. "I reside in Inglewood, which is just 2 miles from Casanova," the doctor explained. "In Dr. Walker's absence, several residents of Casanova have consulted me. About 5 weeks ago, a woman I had never seen before came to my office. She was dressed in deep mourning and kept her veil down, bringing along a young boy around 6 years old for examination. The child was unwell. It looked like typhoid, and the mother was frantic. She needed a permit to admit her son to the children's hospital in town, where I am on staff, so I provided her with one. The incident would have slipped my mind if not for something peculiar. 2 days prior to Mr. Cartwright's shooting, I was called to the country club because someone had been struck by a stray golf ball. It was late when I left, and while walking about a mile from the club on the Claysburg Road, I encountered 2 people engaged in a heated argument. I recognized Mr. Cartwright immediately, and without a doubt, the woman with him was the very one who had consulted me about her child." At the hint of scandal, Mrs. Ogden Fitzhugh straightened in her seat. Hartley looked a bit skeptical, and the coroner jotted down a note. "The children's hospital, you say, Doctor?" he asked. "Yes, the child, recorded as Lucian Wallace, was taken away by his mother 2 weeks ago. I've been trying to track them down, but so far I've had no luck." Suddenly, I recalled the telegram sent to Louise that was signed by someone with the initials FLW, presumably Dr. Walker. Could this veiled woman be the Nina Carrington mentioned in the message? But that was nothing more than idle speculation. I had no way of knowing what had happened, and the inquest was still ongoing. Next, the coroner's physician provided his report. The post-mortem examination revealed that the bullet had entered the chest in the 4th left intercostal space, taking a downward and backward angle, piercing both the heart and lungs. The left lung had collapsed, and the exit wound for the bullet was located in the back muscles, to the left of the spine. It seemed unlikely that such an injury could have been self-inflicted, and the angle of the shot indicated it had been fired from above. Given that the victim was found dead at the bottom of a staircase, it suggested that the shooter was positioned higher up on the stairs. There were no signs of powder burns. The bullet, a .38 caliber, had been discovered in the deceased man's clothing and was presented to the jury. Mr. Jarvis was called next, but his testimony offered little insight. He had received a phone call summoning him to Sunnyside and had hurried over with the steward and Mr. Winthrop, who was currently out of town. They were let in by the housekeeper and found the body at the foot of the staircase. He searched for a weapon, but none was found. The outer door in the east wing was slightly ajar, opened about an inch. My nerves were fraying as the coroner called Mr. John Morgan, and the room buzzed with tension. Mr. Hartley stepped forward and exchanged a few words with the coroner, who nodded in response. Then Michael was called to the stand. "Mr. Donovan," the coroner began, "could you explain the circumstances under which you saw Mr. Arnold Cartwright the night he died?" "I first saw him at the country club," Michael replied calmly, though he appeared quite pale. "I stopped by to get gasoline for my car. Mr. Cartwright was coming out of the card room, talking to Mr. John Morgan. Was the conversation cordial?" Michael paused for a moment. "They were in a disagreement," he replied. I asked Mr. Morgan to leave the club with me and join me at Sunnyside for the weekend. Is it true, Mr. Donovan, that you took Mr. Morgan away from the clubhouse out of fear that a physical altercation might occur? The situation was uncomfortable, Michael said, dodging the question. At that time, did you suspect that the Traders' Bank had been compromised? No. What happened next? Mr. Morgan and I talked in the billiard room until 2:30. And Mr. Arnold Cartwright arrived while you were having your conversation. Yes, he showed up around 2:30. He knocked at the east door, and I let him in. The tension in the room was palpable. Mr. Hartley's gaze was fixed on Michael's face. Can you tell us what his purpose was? He brought a telegram that had arrived at the club for Mr. Morgan. He was sober. Completely at that point, not before. Was his apparent friendliness a departure from his usual demeanor? Yes, I didn't understand it. How long did he stay? About 5 minutes. Then he left through the east entrance. What happened after that? We talked for a little while about a plan Mr. Morgan was considering. Then I went to the stables to get my car, leaving Mr. Morgan alone in the billiard room. Michael hesitated. My sister was there. Mrs. Ogden Fitzhugh had the nerve to turn and scrutinize Claire through her lorgnette. And then what happened? I took the car along the lower road to avoid disturbing anyone at the house. Mr. Morgan came down across the lawn, through the hedge, and got into the car on the road. So, you have no knowledge of Mr. Cartwright's actions after he left the house? None at all. I first heard of his death on Monday evening. Did Mr. Morgan happen to see him on his way across the lawn? I don't believe so. If he had, he would have mentioned it. Thank you, that will be all, Miss Claire Donovan. Claire's answers were just as brief as Michael's. Mrs. Fitzhugh examined her closely, starting from her hat and ending with her shoes. I took pride in the fact that she found nothing amiss with her dress or her demeanor, but poor Claire's account was far from reassuring. She explained that her brother had summoned her after Mr. Cartwright had left. She waited in the billiard room with Mr. Morgan until the car was ready. Then she locked the door at the bottom of the stairs, and carrying a lamp, walked with Mr. Morgan to the main entrance of the house, watching him as he crossed the lawn. Instead of heading straight to her room, she returned to the billiard room for something she'd forgot. The card room and billiard room were dark. She stumbled around, found what she was looking for, and was just about to head back to her room when she heard someone fiddling with the lock on the east outer door. Assuming it was her brother, she moved to the door but caught it opening. Almost immediately, she heard a gunshot, and in a state of panic, fled through the drawing room to alert the household. You didn't hear anything else? The coroner asked. Was there anyone with Mr. Cartwright when he came in? It was completely dark. I heard no voices and noticed nothing, just the door opening, the shot, and then the sound of someone collapsing. So while you ran through the drawing room and upstairs to wake everyone, the shooter could have slipped out the east door. Yes. Thank you, that'll do. I felt I had given the coroner little to work with. I noticed Mr. Hartley smirking to himself, and eventually the coroner seemed to lose interest in me. I confirmed that I had discovered the body, stated I didn't recognize it until Mr. Jarvis informed me, and concluded by looking at Barbara Fitzhugh, remarking that when I rented the house, I hadn't anticipated getting involved in any family drama. At that, her face turned a shade of purple. The ruling was that Arnold Cartwright had lost his life at the hands of a person or persons unknown, and we all began to prepare to leave. Barbara Fitzhugh stormed out without a word to me, but Mr. Harton approached, just as I expected he would. I trust you've decided to give up the house, Miss Donovan, he said. Mrs. Cartwright has contacted me again. I won't be leaving it, I insisted, until I figure out some things that are bothering me. The moment the murderer is found, I'll go. Then, judging by the rumors I've heard, you'll be back in the city very soon, he replied. I knew he suspected the disgraced cashier of the Traders' Bank. Just as I was about to leave the coroner's office, Mr. Hartley came up to me. "How's your patient?" he asked, wearing that peculiar little smile. "I don't have a patient," I said, surprised. "Let me rephrase that. How is Miss Cartwright?" She's doing very well," I stammered. "Good," he said, sounding cheerful. "And what about our ghost? Has it been laid to rest?" "Mr. Hartley," I said suddenly, "I need you to do me a favor. Come to Sunnyside and spend a few days there. The ghost is far from laid to rest. I want you to spend at least one night watching the circular staircase. Arnold Cartwright's murder was just the beginning, not the end." He grew serious at my words. "Perhaps I can manage that," he replied. "I've been working on something else, but I can come out tonight." The trip back to Sunnyside was quiet. I watched Claire closely, feeling a mix of sadness and concern. To me, there was one glaring flaw in her story that stood out for anyone to see. Arnold Cartwright didn't have a key, yet she claimed she had locked the east door. He must have been let in from inside the house. I repeated that in my mind over and over. That night, as gently as I could, I shared the news of her stepbrother's death with Louise. She settled into her large, cushion-filled chair, listening to me intently without a word. It was obvious that she was utterly shocked. If I had hoped to glean any insight from her expression, I was mistaken. She was just as confused as we were. Chapter 18. Taking the detective out to Sunnyside sparked an unexpected outcry from Claire and Michael. I wasn't prepared for their reactions, and I could barely understand what had caused it. To me, Mr. Hartley seemed much less intimidating when I could see what he was doing, compared to his mysterious ways in the city manipulating circumstances and motives to his advantage, uncovering whatever he wished to know about the happenings at Sunnyside through some hidden means. I felt relieved to have him there, especially as the excitement began to escalate. A new dynamic was about to unfold. By Monday or Tuesday at the latest, Dr. Walker would return to his green and white house in the village, and Louise's feelings towards him would determine whether Michael would be happy or miserable. Additionally, her mother's return meant that Louise would have to leave us, and I had grown quite fond of her. Ever since Mr. Hartley arrived at Sunnyside, there was a subtle shift in Claire's behavior towards me. It was hard to pinpoint, but it was definitely there. She was no longer completely open with me, though I believed her affection remained unchanged. I attributed this change to my command that she cease all communication with John Morgan and my refusal to acknowledge any engagement between them. Claire often spent her days exploring the grounds or going on long walks across the countryside, while Michael played golf at the country club repeatedly. After Louise departed the following week, Mr. Hartley and I found ourselves spending quite a bit of time together. He played a decent game of cribbage, but he had a tendency to cheat at solitaire. On the night the detective arrived, Saturday, I had a conversation with him. I shared the unsettling experience that Louise Cartwright had encountered the previous night on the circular staircase, as well as the incident that had so frightened Rosie during the drive. I could tell he thought the information was significant, and when I suggested adding another lock to the east wing door, he firmly disagreed. "I believe it's likely," he said, "that our visitor will return. The best course is to leave everything as it is to avoid raising suspicion. I can keep watch for at least part of the night, and Mr. Donovan will probably lend a hand. I'd advise saying as little as possible to Thomas. The old man knows more than he lets on." I suggested that Alex, the gardener, might be willing to help, and Mr. Hartley agreed to take care of that. However, for one night, he preferred to keep an eye out alone. As it turned out, nothing happened that night. The detective sat in complete darkness on the lower step of the stairs, dozing off occasionally, as he would later admit. Nothing passed him in either direction, and by morning the door remained as securely fastened as it had been the night before. Yet one of the most puzzling events of the entire situation occurred that very night. Emily came to my room on Sunday morning looking as gloomy as could be. She laid out my things as usual, but I noticed her typical chatter was absent. I didn't hear her usual tales about the new cook's extravagant way with eggs, and she even held back from mentioning that Hartley, whose arrival she had clearly viewed with disapproval. "What's wrong, Emily?" I finally asked. "Did you not sleep well last night?" "No, ma'am," she replied stiffly. "Did you have 2 cups of coffee at dinner?" I inquired, trying to gauge the situation. "No, ma'am," she said, a touch indignant. I sat up, nearly spilling the cup of hot water I always have in the morning, a little salted to start my day. "It unsettles the stomach." "Emily Allen," I said, "put down that hairbrush and tell me what's bothering you." Emily let out a long sigh. "Miss Maggie," she replied, "I've been with you for 25 years, through your ups and downs. Can you imagine the times I've had to endure your sulks? But I don't think I can take it any more. My trunk is packed." "Who packed it?" I asked, bracing myself for her to say it was done by some unseen force. "I did, Miss Maggie. You won't believe me, but this house is haunted. Who do you think tumbled down the clothes chute? Who nearly gave Miss Louise a heart attack?" "I'm doing my best to figure it out," I said. "What are you getting at?" She took a deep breath. "There's a hole in the trunk room wall that wasn't there last night. It's large enough for your head to fit through, and there's plaster everywhere." "That's ridiculous," I replied. "Plaster falls all the time." But Emily insisted. "Just ask Alex," she said. "When he put the new cook's trunk there last night, the wall was as smooth as could be. This morning it's been dug out, and there's plaster on the cook's trunk. Miss Maggie, you could bring in a dozen detectives and have one on every staircase, and you still won't catch anything. Some things can't be restrained by handcuffs." Emily had a point. As soon as I could, I made my way up to the trunk room, located directly above my bedroom. The layout of the house's upper story was similar to the second floor, but one end, over the east wing, was left roughly finished with plans to turn it into a ballroom someday. The maids, rooms, trunk room, and various storage areas, including a spacious linen room, opened off a long corridor, just like on the second floor. And in the trunk room, just as Emily had said, there was indeed a fresh break in the plaster. The opening extended not just through the plaster, but all the way through the lathing. I reached into the gap, and just a few feet away, I could feel the bricks of the partition wall. For some reason, the architect had left an empty space here that, even in my shock at discovering it, seemed like a perfect spot for a fire to catch and spread. "Are you sure this hole wasn't here yesterday?" I asked Emily, whose face showed both satisfaction and concern. She pointed to the new cook's trunk, a staple of any household in transition. The top was covered in fine white plaster, just like the floor. However, there were no large chunks of mortar or pieces of lathing scattered about. When I mentioned this to Emily, she simply raised her eyebrows. Confident that the gap had a more sinister origin, she dismissed such minor details as bits of debris. They were likely tucked away neatly, on a headstone, in the Casanova churchyard. I brought Mr. Hartley to see the hole in the wall right after breakfast. His expression was quite strange as he examined it, and the first thing he did was try to figure out what purpose, if any, the hole might serve. He grabbed a candle, and after widening the opening a bit, peered inside. The result revealed nothing. The trunk room, although heated by steam like the rest of the house, had its own fireplace and mantel. The opening had been made between the flue and the outer wall of the house. Upon closer inspection, we found only the bricks of the chimney on one side and the outer wall of the house on the other. The gap didn't go deeper than the flooring. The damage had been done about 4 feet from the floor, and all the missing bits of plaster lay inside. It seemed like the work of a meticulous ghost. In the end, it was quite a letdown. I had anticipated finding a secret room, at the very least, and even Mr. Hartley seemed to think he might finally uncover a clue to the mystery. It was clear, however, that there was nothing more to uncover. Emily reported that all was calm among the servants, and none had been disturbed by the noise. The frustrating part was that our nighttime visitor had clearly found more than one way to enter the house. We resolved to increase our vigilance over the windows and doors that night. Michael was skeptical about the whole situation. He suggested that a crack in the plaster might have appeared months ago without anyone noticing, and that the dust was likely stirred up recently. In the end, we had no choice but to accept this uncertainty, and we spent a rather uneasy Sunday. Claire went to church, while Michael took a long walk in the morning. Louise was able to sit up, and she permitted Michael and Emily to help her downstairs later in the afternoon. The east veranda was shaded, adorned with vines and palms, and brightened with cushions and lounge chairs. We placed Louise in a steamer chair, where she sat quietly, her hands resting in her lap. The atmosphere was heavy with silence. Michael perched on the railing with a pipe, his gaze fixed on Louise as she stared pensively across the valley toward the hills. There was something enigmatic in her expression, and slowly Michael's youthful features lost their cheerfulness at her presence, settling into an expression of worry that resembled his father's. We lingered there until late afternoon, Michael becoming increasingly withdrawn. Just before 6, he rose and went into the house. A few moments later, he came back out and called me over to the telephone. It was Anna Whitcomb from town, and she held me on the line for 20 minutes, telling me about the children having measles and how Madame Sweeney had messed up her new gown. When I finished, Emily stood behind me, lips pressed into a thin line. "I wish you'd at least try to look cheerful, Emily," I sighed. "Your expression could curdle milk." But Emily rarely responded to my teasing. She tightened her lips even more. "He called her up," she said in a mysterious tone. "He had her hold you on the line so he could talk to Miss Louise. A thankless child is sharper than a serpent's tooth." "That's ridiculous," I replied sharply. "I should have known better than to interrupt. It's been ages since you and I were in love, and we've forgotten how it felt." Emily sniffed in disdain. "No man has ever made a fool out of me," she declared proudly. "Well, something certainly did," I shot back. Chapter 19. "Mr. Hartley," I said, once we were alone after dinner that evening, "the inquest yesterday felt to me like nothing more than a review of information we already knew. It revealed nothing new other than Dr. Stewart's account, and even that was given voluntarily." "An inquest is merely a necessary formality, Miss Donovan," he replied. "Unless a crime occurs in plain sight, the inquest does little more than gather evidence from witnesses while their memories are fresh. The police will handle things afterward. We both know how many crucial details remain unspoken. For instance, the deceased had no key, yet Miss Clare claimed to have seen someone struggling with the lock before the door opened. As for the evidence you mention, Dr. Stewart's testimony is something we must approach with caution. He mentioned a patient dressed in black whose face remained hidden. It fits the type of mysterious woman perfectly. Then he runs into Arnold Cartwright, that reckless scoundrel. What was it about the dead? Oh yes, tumultuous. And he finds Cartwright arguing with a lady in black. So the doctor jumps to the conclusion that they must be the same person. Why wasn't Mr. Morgan at the inquest? The detective's expression shifted. Because his doctor claimed he was unwell and unable to leave his bed. Unwell, I exclaimed. Neither Michael nor Claire mentioned that to me. There are more puzzling matters at hand, Miss Donovan. Morgan seems to suggest that he learned about the bank crash only after reading about it in Monday's paper, and that he immediately turned himself in afterwards. I don't believe that. Jonas, the watchman at Traders Bank, tells a different story. He claims that the Thursday night before, around 8:30, Morgan returned to the bank. Jonas let him in, and he said the cashier was practically in a state of shock. Morgan worked until midnight, then locked the vault and left. It was such an unusual occurrence that the watchman thought about it all night long. What did Morgan do when he returned to the Knickerbocker apartments that night? He packed a suitcase, ready for an immediate escape, but he hesitated for too long, waiting for something. I believe he was hoping to see Miss Clare before leaving the country. Then, after he shot Arnold Cartwright that night, he faced a difficult choice. He chose the option that would sway public opinion in his favor and turned himself in as an innocent man. The most damaging evidence against him was his readiness to flee, alongside his decision to return after Cartwright's murder. He was clever enough to deflect suspicion from the more serious accusation. The evening dragged on. Before I went to bed, Mrs. Watson came to my room and asked if I had any arnica. She revealed her hand, which was badly swollen with reddish streaks leading toward her elbow. She explained it was the same hand she had injured the night of the murder a week earlier, and that she hadn't slept well since. It looked serious to me, and I insisted that she see Dr. Stewart. The next morning, Mrs. Watson took the 11 o'clock train to the city and checked into the Charity Hospital. She was suffering from blood poisoning. I intended to visit her, but other matters pushed her from my mind. I did call the hospital that day to arrange a private room for her and whatever comforts she might need. Mrs. Cartwright arrived on Monday evening with her husband's body, and the funeral was set for the following day. The house on Chestnut Street was opened, and Tuesday morning Louise said her goodbyes as she prepared to go home. She called for me before leaving, and I noticed she had been crying. "How can I thank you, Miss Donovan?" she asked. "You have believed in me without demanding any answers. At some point, I might be able to share more with you, and when that time comes, you'll all look down on me, even you, Michael." I wanted to express how thankful I was to have her in my life, but it was clear she had something else to convey. She finally spoke up after saying a strained goodbye to Michael, just as the car was waiting at the door. "Miss Donovan," she said quietly, "if they try to make you give up the house, please do whatever you can to comply. I'm worried about you staying." That was all she said. Claire went into town with her and made sure she got home safely. She reported a noticeable chill in the way Louise was greeted by her mother and noted that Dr. Walker was there, seemingly in charge of the funeral arrangements. Michael vanished shortly after Louise left and returned around 9 that evening, muddy and exhausted. Meanwhile, Thomas wandered around looking downcast and sad, and I noticed the detective keeping a close eye on him during dinner. Even now I can't help but wonder what Thomas knew. What did he suspect? By 10 o'clock, the household was settling in for the night. Emily, who was filling in for Mrs. Watson, had finished inspecting the tea towels and cleaning the corners of the shelves in the cooling room and had gone to bed. Alex, the gardener, trudged heavily up the circular staircase to his room, and Mr. Hartley was checking the locks on the windows. Michael slumped into a chair in the living room, staring blankly ahead. Eventually, he snapped out of it. "What kind of guy is that Walker, Claire?" he asked. "He's fairly tall, very dark, and clean-shaven. Not unattractive," Claire replied, setting aside the book she had been feigning interest in. Michael kicked a nearby stool angrily. "Must be a lovely place to be in the winter," he said, seemingly out of nowhere. "A girl would just wither away here." Just then, someone knocked on the heavy front door. Michael rose slowly and opened it, letting in Warner. He was breathless from running and looked somewhat embarrassed. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I didn't know what else to do. It's about Thomas." "What about Thomas?" I asked. Mr. Hartley had stepped into the hall, and we all turned our attention to Warner. "He's acting strangely," Warner explained. "He's sitting on the edge of the porch, claiming he's seen a ghost. The old man looks unwell, too. He can hardly speak." "He's as superstitious as anyone could be," I remarked. "Michael, fetch some whiskey, and we'll all go down." No one moved to get the whiskey, so I guessed there might be 3 flasks stashed for emergencies. Claire wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and we began the walk down the hill. I had wandered around this place so many times at night that I knew the path perfectly. But when we reached the porch, there was no sign of Thomas, either outside or inside the house. The men exchanged meaningful glances, and Warner picked up a lantern. "He can't have gone far," he said. "He was shaking so badly he could hardly stand when I left him." Hartley and Michael went around the lodge, calling the old man's name at intervals, but there was no response. No Thomas appeared, bowing and flashing his white teeth in the dark. I started to feel a vague sense of unease for the first time. Claire, who rarely got nervous in the darkness, walked alone down the drive to the gate, standing there and gazing along the dimly lit road while I lingered on the small veranda. Warner looked puzzled. He moved to the edge of the veranda and scrutinized the space, as if it ought to provide answers. "He might have wandered into the house," he said, but he couldn't have climbed the stairs. At any rate, he's not inside or outside, as far as I can see. The others had returned, and no one had found any trace of the old man. His pipe, still warm, rested on the edge of the rail, and on the table lay his old grey hat, a sign that its owner hadn't gone far. In truth, he was just nearby. My eyes roamed the room from the table and settled on the door of a closet. I can't quite explain what compelled me, but I walked over and turned the knob. The door swung open with a force as if something had been pressing against it, and something tumbled forward, landing in a heap on the floor. It was Thomas, untouched, yet lifeless. Chapter 20. Warner dropped to his knees immediately, trying to loosen the old man's collar, but Michael quickly grasped his hand. "Leave him be," he said. "There's nothing you can do. He's gone." We stood there, all of us avoiding each other's eyes, speaking softly and respectfully in the presence of death. An unspoken suspicion hung in the air, heavy upon our hearts. When Mr. Hartley finished his brief examination, he stood and brushed off his trousers. "There's no sign of injury," he announced, and I let out a long sigh of relief. From what Warner describes, combined with his hiding in the closet, it seems he was scared to death. A fright and a weak heart together. "But what could have frightened him so?" Claire inquired. "He seemed fine during dinner. Warner, what did he say when you found him on the porch?" Warner looked shaken. His honest, boyish face had turned pale. "Just what I told you, Miss Donovan. He'd been reading the paper downstairs. I parked the car, and feeling tired, I headed down to the lodge to get ready for bed. As I was going up the stairs, Thomas put down the paper and took his pipe outside onto the porch. Then I heard him shout." "What did he say?" Hartley pressed. I couldn't catch the words, but his voice sounded off. He sounded shocked. I waited to hear him call out again, but he didn't, so I went downstairs. He was sitting on the steps of the porch, staring straight ahead as if he were seeing something in the trees across the road. He kept mumbling something about having seen a ghost. He looked strange, and I tried to get him inside, but he wouldn't budge. That's when I figured I should head back to the house. "Did he say anything else that made sense?" I asked. "He mentioned something about the grave, giving up its dead." Mr. Hartley was rifling through the old man's pockets, while Claire gently arranged his arms, crossing them neatly over his always spotless white shirt. Hartley looked up at me. "What was it you mentioned, Miss Donovan, about the murder at the house being a beginning rather than an end? By Jove, I believe you were right." During his investigation, the detective had rummaged through the inner pocket of the deceased butler's black coat. There, he discovered a few items that caught his interest. A small flat key attached to a red cord, and a white piece of paper with something written in Thomas's cramped handwriting. Mr. Hartley read it, and then handed it to me. It was an address, written in fresh ink. LUCINWALLACE, 14 Elm Street, Richfield. As the cards circulated, both the detective and I kept an eye out for any reactions it might provoke, but other than confusion, there seemed to be none. "Richfield," Claire exclaimed. "Elm Street is the main road. Don't you remember, Michael?" "Lucian Wallace," Michael said. "That's the child Stewart mentioned at the inquest." Warner, with his mechanical instinct, reached for the key. His comment came as no surprise. "Yale lock," he noted. "Most likely a key to the east entry." There was no reason for Thomas, an old and trusted servant, not to have a key to that specific door, even though the servant's entrance was in the west wing. However, I hadn't known about this key, and it opened up a whole new line of speculation. But for now, there were many matters to address, so we left Warner with the body and made our way back to the house. Mr. Hartley walked alongside me, while Michael and Claire followed behind. "I suppose I should inform the Cartwrights," I said. "They'll know if Thomas had any family and how to contact them. I plan to cover the funeral expenses, but we need to find his relatives. What do you think scared him so badly, Mr. Hartley?" "It's hard to say," he replied slowly, "but I believe we can be certain it was fear, and that he was trying to hide from something. I apologize for more than one reason. I've always thought that Thomas knew something, or at least suspected something, that he never shared. Do you have any idea how much cash was in that old, tattered wallet of his? Nearly $100. That's almost 2 months' pay, and yet those folks hardly ever have a dime to their names. Well, whatever Thomas knew will be taken to the grave with him. Michael suggested we search the grounds, but Mr. Hartley shot down the idea. You won't find anything, he said. Anyone clever enough to sneak into Sunnyside and make a hole in the wall while I was watching downstairs won't be caught by just wandering around the shrubbery with a lantern. With Thomas's death, I sensed that a turning point had arrived at Sunnyside. The following night was surprisingly calm. Michael kept watch at the foot of the staircase, and a complicated system of bolts on the other doors seemed effective. At one point during the night, I woke up thinking I heard the tapping again, but everything was quiet, and I had reached a point where I refused to be unsettled by trivial things. The Cartwrights were informed of Thomas's passing, and this led to my first meeting with Dr. Walker. He arrived early the next morning, just as we were finishing breakfast, in a professional-looking black car. I found him pacing in the living room, and despite my initial dislike, I had to admit he was quite presentable. He was a big guy, tall and dark, just as Claire had described, smooth-shaven and upright, with strong features and a square jaw. He looked meticulously polished, and his demeanor was almost overly formal. I must apologize for dropping by so early, Miss Donovan, he said as he took a seat. The chair was lower than he had anticipated, and he felt the need to gather his composure before proceeding. My professional responsibilities are pressing and have been long ignored, and he shifted to a more casual tone. Something needs to be done about that body. Indeed, I replied, perched on the edge of my seat. I simply wanted the contact information for Thomas's family. You could have just called if you were busy. He gave a slight smile. I wanted to discuss something else with you, he said. Regarding Thomas, Mrs. Cartwright wishes to cover the expenses herself. I've already informed his brother in the village about the situation. It seems it was heart disease. Thomas always had a weak heart. Heart disease and shock, I said, still seated at the edge of my chair. But the doctor showed no signs of leaving. I've heard you have a ghost haunting this place, and that detectives are swarming around trying to get rid of it, he said. For some reason, I felt like he was trying to extract information from me, as Michael would say. You've been misinformed, I responded. What, no ghost, no detectives? He exclaimed, still smiling. What a letdown for the village. I bristled at his attempt at humor. This had been far from amusing for us. Dr. Walker, I said sharply, I find no humor in this situation. Since I arrived, one man has been shot, and another has died from shock. There have been intruders in the house and unsettling noises. If you think that's funny, then there's something wrong with my sense of humor. You're missing the point, he said, maintaining his good-natured demeanor. What I find amusing is that you choose to stay here under these circumstances. I would think nothing could convince you to remain. You're mistaken. Every event that has transpired only strengthens my determination to stay until this mystery is unraveled. I have a message for you, Miss Donovan, he said, finally standing up. Mrs. Cartwright asked me to thank you for your kindness to Louise. Her whim, unfortunately timed, caused a great deal of inconvenience. Also, this is a sensitive matter. She requested that I appeal to your natural sympathy for her at this time, and ask if you might reconsider your decision regarding the house. Sunnyside is her home. She loves it dearly, and right now, she longs for a place to retreat for some quiet and peace. She must have had a change of heart, I said, perhaps more unkindly than intended. Louise told me her mother couldn't stand the place. Besides, this is hardly a refuge for quiet and peace at the moment. Anyway, Doctor, while I don't want to push this issue, I will certainly stay here for some time at least. How long do you plan to stay? He asked. My lease is for 6 months. I intend to remain until we find some explanation for certain events. My own family is now involved, and I will do everything I can to unravel the mystery of Arnold Cartwright's murder. The doctor stood there, looking down, thoughtfully slapping his gloves against the palm of a well-groomed hand. You mentioned there have been intruders in the house, he asked. Are you absolutely sure of that, Miss Donovan? Yes. In which part of the house? In the east wing. Can you tell me when these intrusions occurred, and what they seemed to be after? Was it robbery? No, I replied firmly. As for the timing, once on Friday night a week ago, again the following night when Arnold Cartwright was murdered, and once more last Friday night. The doctor's expression turned serious. He appeared to be weighing something in his mind, and finally reached a conclusion. Miss Donovan, he said, I find myself in a difficult position. I understand your point of view, but do you really think this is wise? Since you've arrived, there have been hostile acts directed at you and your family. I'm not trying to be alarmist, but please take my advice. Leave before something happens that you might regret for the rest of your life. I accept the responsibility, I replied coolly. I believe he then considered me a lost cause. He asked to see where Arnold Cartwright's body had been found, and I took him there. He examined the entire house closely, inspecting the stairs and the lock. After he said his formal goodbye, I was certain of one thing. Dr. Walker would do everything in his power to get me out of Sunnyside.